today I would like to look at the Chinese economy. As we all know, China has, if you read about China, almost everywhere in the news you hear about the prognosis about China is going to be like huge. They're going to, they are superseding United States very quickly. In nominal terms, already they have superseded them in purchasing power parity terms. That means what you can buy with the yuan relative to what you can buy with the dollar. So already, like the total value, the GDP in purchasing power parity terms has superseded the United States. And soon they will do so in nominal terms. And if you look at sector level, you can see that they have become the biggest manufacturer, they have become the biggest this, that. They have the most countries in the world where China is the #1 trading partner. So speaking about the Chinese economy, it's very often in superlatives, like okay, the biggest, the best. But is this actually going to materialize? Is China really going to be as big, as dominant as we think it will be? So today I hope I can start a discussion with you, just looking at like two sides of the same medal, trying to kind of establish together with you whether or not China will be as powerful as we think it may be, or maybe are there also risks at the horizon that China will not become as big, as powerful economy-wise as many people believe. So looking at the Chinese economy, looking at the past, then we can see a number of a few figures. China has had strong growth since 1978. So since 1978, China had strong growth and no economic crisis, which is very impressive. For such a long period, without any major economic crisis, China has been growing between 8 and more than 10% per year. In the beginning, that is rather easy, but they have been keeping up this pace and rapidly developing.
1978 was Nixon visited the year?
Yes, I think that was Nixon visited.
China opened the country?
Yes. So that was very significant, and China also made this what you often refer to. So China needs to, we need to grow economically, otherwise there is no future for the Communist Party. So this is the emphasis on the economy was basically announced since 1978, and China followed suit. So they have been growing very rapidly, even during the financial crisis 2008-2009. China did not collapse. They still showed strong growth figures. They are very important, like I said, in terms of manufacturing, the #1 manufacturing country. They have the largest number of trade partners. Their development bank actually invests more than the World Bank. So China has become very important. And it's estimated that in 2030, China will have a global GDP share of 30%. That means that of the total GDP in 2030, 30% will be Chinese. Is that remarkable? Yes, that is remarkable. But if we look at history, then we can see that 200 years ago, China also accounted for 30% of the global GDP, roughly speaking. So basically the rise of China is not only a rise, it's also a revival of China. So what will the economy look like in 2030? It's estimated that China will account for 30%, India will account for 19%, then the US will account for 15%, Europe for 13%, and Japan for 3%. So a lot of things will change. Not only will China become more important, also today's developing nations will lead the world. So and the significance of the United States, Europe, the traditional economic powerhouses, will diminish, and Japan also will not grow, and their relevance within the world will rapidly decrease.
This figure shows nominal.
Nominal, yes. But these kinds of forecasts are an estimates. They are extrapolations from past results. So they are basically deducted from looking back at the past, and by looking back at the past, forecasting history. So basically it's looking at the trend and what would happen if these trends continue. But will these trends continue? That is important to ask yourself, because these figures, they all look very nice, but we don't know what will happen in the near future.
China might be 20%, right?
Yes, China, I mean, based on the past, we forecast the future. Looking back at the past might be relevant, but we have to take other elements into consideration to make a better forecast about the future, because results in the past cannot always tell whether you will be successful in the future. Which brings me to the middle income trap. Middle income trap is, well, a kind of probably well-known concept, and middle income trap is defined as an economic development situation where a country attains a certain income and gets stuck at that level. So that means basically that a country grows quickly and is forecasted to grow further, but then all of a sudden, like around middle income, which is approximately $10,000 GDP per person, around that middle income level, their growth suddenly starts to slow down. And we've seen this, for example, in South Africa, in Brazil. Another good example, Indonesia. So they have fallen into the middle income trap. And why does a middle income trap occur? The reason for a middle income trap is a country will lose their competitive edge in exportation of a manufactured goods because their wages rise. So basically why countries start to rise is they have a competitive advantage in low wages. As we saw, for example, in the Asian tigers, as we see in China, the wages are significantly below those of Western workers. And you can use that advantage by attracting manufacturing. And that works well if you attract a lot of manufacturing, but if those wages start rising, if more money flows into the country, wages start rising. And once wages start rising, they are unable to keep up with economically more developed countries, because like workers in the United States, they have, for example, much more capital invested. So the labor productivity, the output per worker is much higher. So once wages start rising, the competitiveness of these developing nations starts to diminish very rapidly. So if, for example, an American worker, based on training, based on capital that he can utilize, so equipment that he can utilize when during manufacturing, if the output of an American worker is 3 times as high as a Chinese worker, then you need to add 3 times more Chinese workers relative to one American worker, which means that if the wage of a Chinese worker is $10,000, then the cost of manufacturing the same good in United States versus so if it takes 3 workers in China to produce the same good as in the United States, you can see that at $10,000 already they start the competitive edge of China is starting to wear off, because it only takes 1 worker in the United States to make the same. So competition from the United States becomes stronger based on the equipment that they have. So they're unable to keep up with economically more developed countries with higher labor productivity. Examples, newly industrialized economies such as South Africa, Brazil have not grown their per capita income above $10,000 to $12,000 at constant prices. At constant prices means at a price level corrected for inflation. So they suffer from low investment, slow growth in secondary sector. Secondary sector meaning manufacturing, limited industrial diversification, and poor labor market conditions. So basically, low investment is lethal because if if very little money is invested, then the competitiveness, the labor productivity is key here. So if the labor productivity, if the tools that these workers can utilize remain behind of industrialized countries, then the middle income trap will become earlier because labor productivity is the sum of labor, of physical labor, plus the tools that you can utilize. So this is what is occurring, and now the question is: will China fall into this middle income trap? Yes or no? This is crucial to understand because China at the moment is also at this $10,000, well, a little bit below. But if we look at the eastern part of China, then they are currently at this wage level. So will they fall into this middle income trap, or can they escape this middle income trap? So will they look like Indonesia and Brazil, or will they look more like, for example, Taiwan and Korea, South Korea?
By the way, do you know the recently American company shifting factory from China to United States, bring back? And their analysis is based upon, according to economists, their analysis, the wages of local wages and compared with Chinese wages, including technology and some performance, almost the same. 90% is almost the same. American little bit expensive, but almost same in the case of comparison the wage cost.
Yes.
But actual pay is lower. China is still lower.
Absolutely.
But actually, consider for management decision making periods is almost the same. That's the reason many companies shifting from China to
back to the United States. Yeah. But it all has to do with labor productivity. It's not only labor cost, but also labor productivity.
95% they said. So it means almost negative. It takes 1 year, couple of years later, is America is better than China. That is their decision.
Yeah.
So this is the economist told that kind of article last month. I read it.
Yeah. So you have two options. Basically, you can if this middle income trap would occur in China, you can look for other like low wage countries where you can kind of utilize that advantage, but only for a limited time, because once these countries become successful, their wages start to rise, and you have to get out again. Yeah. So this is a non-sustainable.
Chinese companies themselves, they are shifting from mainland China to Southeast Asia. They're their own factories because of chasing for lower wages.
Yes.
And the problem is they had the advantage for manufacturing cost beforehand, but not anymore.
No.
And Chinese government encouraged the Chinese company try to upgrade the skill of the labor and for production level instead of cheaper level. So I think, but this does not succeed very well. So it means this middle income trap is actually prevailing in China because of the current situation. What I said, right?
Yeah. If like what we see here, the typical middle income trap characteristics are not enough investment, so lagging behind of manufacturing elsewhere.
Furthermore, in China, they do not have high-tech technology, high-tech. So they just technology so far, traditional technology they are adopting for manufacturing, or they don't have so much advanced technology for their companies. But fortunately, they now focus on financial sector rather than manufacturing. So they more than 50% now that their financial sectors involved in Chinese economy. So this is one good, they are now is getting to the new era for their industrial, not industrial areas, but more advantage. So this is the other aspect they are now focusing on.
So
New sector. right?
Okay, well, so there are two sides to that story. Depends on which economists you listen to. The whole idea of middle income trap, the concept in itself is important to realize and to create an understanding and an awareness that you have to improve, you have to invest, you have to diversify your labor market, you have to liberalize your capital market in order to attract more investments and creative destruction, meaning that you have to break with the old technologies and introduce new technologies in order to become more competitive. That is one way of looking at it. There are also economists who say that actually this whole belief in the middle income trap, based on, for example, what we see now, these signals in China that the economy is coming to a standstill, or at least is going through a serious decline. That basically you can compare that to an athlete. A young athlete who has a bad year. It doesn't mean that it's a bad athlete. And that could lead to all kinds of liberalizations and market liberalization. But actually what is necessary is just to be a little bit more patient and to persevere and to go on the same track and not panicking, but just building a solid base under the economy without all kinds of drastic changes, because China has been performing very, very well. So it's definitely also important not to panic and to look at the situation as maybe it is just a temporary setback. Maybe it is just a slow period for China, but they can still get out of it. I mean, they have huge potential to actually grow out of it. They have the manpower. They have so much potential to actually grow out of this middle income trap. So to escape, what to do to escape from this middle income trap? Transform your labor-intensive export sectors to an innovative economy. Competition and creative destruction. So labor-intensive export sector, that is the most difficult sector, because once your labor costs start to rise and you need to employ a lot of labor to produce the same thing as for example in the United States. Once the labor costs start to rise, your labor-intensive export sectors become less competitive. So you need to create innovation, competition and creative destruction. That means that you not only need to look at, okay, how can we do it as cheap as possible, how can we do it as effective as possible. So you need to focus on how you can create more dynamics in your economy, how you can produce differently, can produce better, can produce more efficient and effective. And what is needed to escape this middle income trap are three things: top-notch research universities. Number two is a dynamic labor market system where people can flow in and flow out easily. What would happen based on creative destruction is that basically you are creating more efficiency, but it also means that some industries will die. And if industries die, it's very important that you bring those laborers from less productive sectors to more productive sectors. So therefore, it's very important that you have labor market flexibility, so that you can easily bring workers from an unproductive sector to a productive sector. Now look at, for example, the Chinese agricultural sector, which is very unproductive. A lot of people still working in the countryside. For China, there's a big opportunity to bring those agricultural workers to the cities and employ them in much higher in sectors that have much more added value. So a dynamic labor market system is very important. In Europe we have the same thing. It was understood that open borders are very important to bring laborers in unproductive sectors to productive sectors. That's why we have free movement of people. I can, as a European citizen, I can work in Spain or Italy or wherever.
But how come these people moving to German or the other countries? But they are struggling, right? So labor force are better moving to France or Italy or the other countries.
Yes, but it happens a lot. I worked in Germany for some time and worked overseas a lot.
Because, for example, Greece is only 13 million population, but still their economy is so struggling.
Yes.
And there are many Greece people sticking to their own country.
Yes.
That's the reason why unemployment rate is very so high, right?
Because
well, as you know, the young people are almost 50% unemployed, right?
yes, and they don't move out.
How come they move out? And instead, do you know that recently illegal immigrant people get into Greece? Lots of immigrants from Africa.
Really?
Yeah. Into Greece, focus on Greece. And they cannot protect those people. They get in the 3,000 island, So many people flood into the Greece. So they cannot handle it. It's called problem. You don't know that?
But no, I didn't know that. Italy was always a...
No, Greece. Recently Greece is because I don't know how come African people know that Greece is very weak for protection, but very easy to get in.
Okay.
But this is Europe. I live always, skeptical for especially South Europe, like Spain. They have unemployment is very high, but still people don't move, right?
No, but this is a cultural. Most likely, this is cultural inflexibility. Languages. So it's if you don't speak English, if you don't speak the local language, it's much more difficult to get employment. I realized this when I came to Japan. I didn't speak any Japanese, so for me it was very difficult to find a job. Who in their right mind would hire me?
Oh, I see. Algeria people come into France because they can speak French.
Exactly.
And Moroccan and Turkey is going to Germany. And I'm not sure they can speak German.
No.
Many people.
Actually, German people can speak good English most of the time, and also like Dutch. Your mother tongue is very similar to German, not just Swiss German.
Yes.
So then for you, it's much easier to learn the European language.
Absolutely.
I guess, right?
Yeah.
Well, German people can speak English.
But most of the
So
people,
today they can, but this is when I was small. Nobody in Germany could speak English.
Oh yeah.
This completely changed.
Oh yeah. I think that past 20, 20 years.
Yes.
Most of the people can speak.
Exactly.
But sometimes I don't need to use my German.
Even in
because
France.
Yeah, exactly. Because France was 20 years ago, it was horrible. But
Nobody.
Nobody.
Yeah, but it's a kind of gradually getting used to the idea that their country is not the center of the world. Has become much bigger today. Maybe because of internet, maybe because of more economic connection. And the financial system comprising of venture capital, private equity, and security markets. Why is this important? Because these new technologies need to be developed. That need to be worthwhile. People who have good ideas need access to capital to develop it. So you need a kind of a venture capital market to help you to develop these technologies to become more competitive. So top-notch research universities together with a dynamic labor market system and a financial system that can support this creative destruction. Oh. So will China escape this middle income trap? There are I think 3 reasons to say yes, they will be able to escape this. Number 1, they have a pretty high Gini coefficient. Gini coefficient is a coefficient. Sorry?
Do you know how much is it? 3.5.
Gini, I think it's ridiculously high. It's like 0.7.
Oh yeah, very high.
Yeah. It's one of the highest in the world actually.
Yeah.
It's even worse than South Africa. So the income inequality in China is very, very high. That is also an opportunity, because a lot of poor people from mostly western parts of China will catch up in the near future.
What do you mean the poor will catch up?
The poor will catch up. That means that at the moment we have in the eastern part we have average wages that are pretty high, but in the western part there is still a huge opportunity to grow the GDP of China. So they still have lots of opportunities to actually grow. So the high Gini will probably be one factor that could help China to escape the middle income trend. Huge labor potential in the countryside. So if they are capable of introducing this flexibility in the labor market, there is a huge potential in the countryside. A lot of people who are now working in the very unproductive agricultural sector that could move to the cities, and this is actually a policy that the Chinese government is pursuing, to bring more people to the cities, not to the main cities, but they are growing new cities to bring countryside laborers and employ them in manufacturing, for example. They have excellent students. Chinese students, Shanghai students, they I think last year they scored highest in mathematics and a lot of other tests. So China is breeding excellent students, which is very important, because that excellence is necessary to create new technologies, new ways of doing things. So they have the potential to actually bring about creative destruction. And another thing that we cannot underestimate, that even though China is not a democracy, and we tend to always put democracy over any other kind of system, but actually they have a very effective and empowered leadership. Empowered means that they have the ability to make changes. In a democratic system, there is a tendency or an inclination to focus on short-term gains, because the election is always just around the corner. So it is very tempting for politicians to not take unpopular measures. But sometimes unpopular measures are necessary. In China, they have to worry much less about these elections. They have much firmer grip on things, and that capacity, that strength, could be a big advantage in China relative to other countries like Brazil, where they have a tradition of a more short-term view of life, basically today. Basically, China's situation is different. And knowledge is something very, very flux. So it can very easily move from A to B. It's the whole idea that, okay, China may be lacking and whatever. But there is a huge potential for knowledge to be applied to huge numbers in China, like 1.3 billion people, a huge economy potentially. So the ideas, not only scientists, etc., but also ideas could very easily move. So ideas and new technologies could very easily be imported into China. So this whole idea of lagging behind of China in terms of science and technology, I think is not really of today.
Okay.
Why wouldn't it work? Well, actually, extrapolations are based on past performance. So looking at the past, we can make forecasts about the future. But if we look at the past, then we see highly inflated growth rates, like actual growth rates, like the current growth rates are estimated to be, or are published to be, about 7%. But if we look at other data, like for example transportation data and other data, it can be determined that probably the actual growth rate is not 7%, but much closer to approximately 3%. So if we are basing our future predictions on past data, then we have to take into consideration that actually past data is not as clean as we think. And another thing is that there are signals that the Chinese policymakers are also a little bit concerned about how the economy is developing. We do not have exact data, but the people who do have probably do have exact data. The policymakers are also responding in a way that brings concern to the market. So they are responding to a slowdown with super low interest rates. They are currently at 4-point-something%, which is lower as they've ever been in China, and that is so they have been set very low to stimulate the economy, to stimulate investments, which is a signal that basically also the Chinese policymakers are not assured about what's happening with the economy. Then we had the stock market crash, 30% over the board, 30% decrease in stock market, an overall stock market value in Shanghai. That is a total loss of $3 trillion in value. And
past couple of months, right?
yes, past couple of months since July. Yes, and actually last Friday the market again dipped another I think 4%, yeah, 4-point-something%, taking with them like Japan, the Nikkei index went down 2.1%. Europe went down, the United States went down. So there is a lot of concern that the stock market is actually crashing.
So this morning Japan probably will get another big crash. Right?
Possibly. Everybody will look at how Japan will open, and that will determine how the rest of the day will go in Europe and the United States. So the stock market crash. Now this could be a correction, because stock market is always volatile, and they have been increasing rapidly. One of the reasons why it has been increasing rapidly because the Chinese government has stimulated private investment. Most of the stock markets, the Western stock markets, have a lot of institutional investors. That means, for example, pension funds, and they are much more educated, much more informed than the private investors. But in China, 80% of the investors are small investors, people who put in their money, who are much more susceptible to emotions and short-term thinking than the institutional investors. And actually, I read somewhere that 60% of those private investors did not even finish high school. This market is this stock market is deemed to be very volatile. Exports decreased 8% in the last 12 months. And another policy by the Chinese government, that the cheaper renminbi has been introduced to boost exports. So the government seems to be concerned. They are supporting the stock market. They are devaluating the renminbi against the US dollars, losing a lot of foreign exchange currency, and they are decreasing the interest rates. So it seems like there is something going on, and the Chinese authorities are also concerned about the future of the Chinese economy.